Him.
Okay, and we're back, and we actually have a special guest with us today, somebody who wasn't actually scheduled to be here, and we're glad to have him. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody on the internet?
Hi, I'm Russ Burlingame. I'm the senior staff writer for comicbook.com and the host of their Panel Discussions podcast.
And I just found out from Jeff that you'd stopped by the store. I guess you were down in New York City, as I understand it, for the...
Yeah. I used to live in New York, and so I have a lot of the press contacts down there. And the folks at Disney weren't good enough to set me up with interviews with Clark Gregg and Tom Hiddleston from the Avengers. And so when I was trying to schedule all that, they said, hey, you want to go see the movie a few days early so that you've seen it before you talk to them? And I was like, yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, who would say no to that, really?
So I went down to New York for April 25th. They had a press screening. And so I had seen it, for 2 weeks or something before everybody started really having their reactions to it.
So let me ask you, 2 weeks of knowledge of that movie for the past 2 weeks, how difficult was it to basically just keep from telling everybody?
It's actually funny. It was easier than you'd think because a big incentive for it was that I knew Clark Gregg and Tom Hiddleston, and Clark Gregg is militantly anti-spoiler.
Okay.
For context, this is the guy who plays Agent Coulson in the film, and he'll block people on Twitter if they post spoilers. And so ahead of time, I knew, because I've been watching his Twitter feed and watching how angry he gets with people when they go on it, and so I knew, okay, so the biggest thing I got to do is I see this movie. I'm going to talk to him a week later, I just got to make sure that nothing I say spoils anything, so that way I can still use it on the podcast.
Is it temptation to go the other direction with him and just mess with his head and say, now when you turned 60 feet tall in the movie, what?
That might have been a really good idea, actually. Ironically, it was with Clark. He was very, very kind of professional, and so I didn't mess with him very much. When I talked to Tom Hiddleston, who plays Loki, we spent a lot of time talking about his unique curse word that he used in the film.
Which we will get into, just for spoiler reason. I myself haven't actually seen the movie yet. People have been following my Facebook page and everything. My brother lives in Maryland, and he's actually said, hey, he sent me a text message the other day, can you do me a huge favor? And I said, sure, what? He goes, don't see the movie until I come up Memorial Day weekend. Because I wanted, so him and his wife can go with my girlfriend and I. And I'm like, okay, you never read a comic book in your life, okay? You're 2 years older than me, and I know this for a fact. Do you know this is the most eagerly anticipated film in comic book world ever? And you want me to promise you I won't see it till Memorial Day weekend? He goes, please. You're lucky you're my brother, or else I'd kick your butt. So I'm going to be blocking my ears for weeks now. But unfortunately, I already do know the spoilers. So.
Yeah, one of the things I was pretty proud of is that I managed to write a 1,800-word review
without actually saying anything.
Without spoiling anything. and I mean, there's a gentleman over there, Aaron Cooter.
Aaron's been on the show before. He's going to be on right after you, in fact.
Oh, well, he was saying he's like a hardliner. He wants to know absolutely nothing about anything. And so he couldn't read the review because the review is oh yes, they handled this character very well. The only problem is that he played too much for laughs. And so he doesn't want to know even that much. And so if you want to go in totally in the dark, don't read the review there. But I was pretty proud of myself that I managed to write a pretty lengthy and detailed review without blowing any major plot points at all.
Well, that's awesome. What I've been telling people ever since I found out the spoiler was basically this, is that if you're a comic book fan and you go see the movie with a non-comic book fan, then at the end of the movie, in that final after-credit scene, you're going to have some explaining to do.
Right.
And that's the best way to, it leaves it totally vague still.
Yeah, I think what I said in my review was something even more vague than that. It was something along the lines of, it's important to stay for it because it obviously is setting the stage for what's to come later.
Absolutely. But that's so vague, but also at the same time, a staple of all of the Marvel films that have come out the last couple of years. There's going to be an after-credit scene, and it's going to set up the next show.
One of the most interesting things to me is that Kevin Feige, the guy who's the president of Marvel Studios, had expressed to, I think it was MTV News recently, that there was one particular property, a very, very unlikely property, that he said, this is one of the movies I want to actively pursue. And I'm skating around saying the words only because what I'll say next, which is that after credits scene perfectly dovetails into this other property that I thought, why the heck would they make? And then you see that after credits scene, and you're like, oh, because
that's why.
You know.
And you know, and one of the things that people have been saying is that because of the huge success of this movie and really Marvel's overall plan, because this has been a coordinating nightmare from what some people have said.
Oh yeah.
Trying to say, okay, A falls into B, B's into C and D, which are 2 years out.
Yeah.
You really have to say that Marvel was incredibly ambitious for this project.
Oh yeah.
And it really says to me that that ambition paid off well this weekend.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the thing I think is really interesting is that a lot of people, early reviews and things like that, who were, I won't say negative, but less positive about this, because let's face it, nobody's written a bad review of this movie yet. Everybody's been varying degrees of good. But some of the less positive people have pointed out that, like, continuity-wise, Thor just showing up out of the blue makes no sense. For that to be the biggest problem that they had, trying to juggle these like 5 movies, is a real feather in the cap of Kevin Feige and Josh.
And to do it successfully to the point where these characters, because I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Iron Man was great, Captain America was great, Thor was great, Hulk was great. Well, let's say for example, Thor didn't do as well in the theaters, right? Then you've got a major character in the film that's tied to a dismal failure and becomes an anchor to the whole film.
Yeah, it's actually Clark Gregg in the interview that I did with him said point blank that one of the things that was kind of scary about this project is that if any one of these had been an out-and-out flop, then the chances of Disney giving you $400 million or whatever crazy thing you needed to make the Avengers was basically zero.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that the lowest grossing of them all was The Incredible Hulk, which is, it was still
a good movie.
It was still a good movie. It was also leagues and leagues better than the previous Incredible Hulk movie, which I think really helped.
Yes.
And it was still profitable. I mean, I think that the fact that Thor, which for all intents and purposes, I'm going to stop on the table.
No, you're fine. There you go.
I think that the fact that Thor, which for all intents and purposes is an anonymous character to the mainstream audience, outgrossed Captain America last year at the domestic box office is absolutely insane. And it's a real tribute to the fact that Marvel knew up front, like, we have to focus on making people know that Thor is a thing to watch.
Yes.
Like, because obviously people are going to go see Captain America one way or the other. I really thought last year, I remember sitting at my, sitting on my podcast and I was speculating about movies and what was coming out that year and how they were going to perform. And I remember thinking that, in all likelihood, Thor would be cinematically the best of the films, but that it would be the lowest grossing.
And having Kenneth Branagh directing it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm a huge Kenneth Branagh fan from the days of him really kind of taking over the reins of Shakespeare films for mainstream audiences from the previous directors.
Yeah.
I grew up watching the Romeo and Juliet and all the other films that were done by some of the greats. And to see him do that, and then to kind of go in the direction of Thor. When I first heard the casting news, I went, ooh?
Yeah, it's funny because Hiddleston, who plays Loki in both Thor and the Avengers, he is doing Henry IV and Henry V right now for BBC.
Okay.
And talked to him a little bit about that, about the idea of both Joss Whedon and Kenneth Branagh being kind of auteur filmmakers, but who are known for very different things.
Absolutely.
And he said that it's interesting because Branagh is such a fan of like sci-fi and comics and stuff like this, that he brings the same kind of attention to detail and reverence for the source material to doing a comic book adaptation that he brings to Shakespeare work. And so in that way it makes a lot of sense. In the same way that Joss Whedon has come out of the closet as a Shakespeare guy. He's now doing this hit the $2,000 produced in his house Much Ado About Nothing that he just did.
I heard about that. I haven't seen it yet, though.
I don't think anybody has. I think it's going to show at some festival this summer.
Probably be like, the same thing they did with, Dr. Horrible, Sing Along Blog.
Yeah.
So basically throw that out there and let people,
Actually, you can probably, one of the nice things about the media market these days is that if you want to go like direct to Netflix, you see things like Lily Hammer and Arrested Development. It's like, more and more distribution channels are opening up for stuff like that, and its movies are about 5 years ahead of comics, and so it's really interesting watching that and going, okay, so what have we got to look forward to in just a couple of years? You know, I'm starting working on a graphic novel now. By the time I'm finished with it, I expect that there's a really realistic chance that I'll never have to print an issue.
There you go. You know, have digital copies all over the place.
Yeah.
So, and then, you know, like I say, with the success of Avengers, you know, I think Marvel's really keen now to kind of say, okay, we've done this. Now let's take some of the lesser known characters, like you know, one of the biggest rumors for the past 2 years has been Ant-Man. Were they going to throw Ant-Man in there? Or were they going to go ahead and throw a movie of him out there? Is it going to be comedy? Is it going to be serious? I can see now, you know, hopefully, fingers crossed, Marvel really taking the time to say, we can afford to do X amount of budget for such and such character.
Well, and the other thing is that now that this has been a bona fide success, it strips the Marvel Universe of this thing that every single one has to be a blockbuster every single time. You know, we were just talking about how the Avengers might not have gotten made if Thor had tanked. Well, if they make Ant-Man and it makes $40 million and everybody hates it, then that's kind of okay because they'll be able to go, yeah, but we made Avengers. Leave us alone for a minute.
Exactly.
You know,
it's $282 million first week in foreign sales, folks.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, bite us.
Yeah, it's gonna. By the time it's done here in the States, it's gonna cross 600 million this weekend. So in the first 10 days of release,
I can easily see that this weekend. I mean, you know, when you look at the midnight showings, you look at, you know, I have a friend of mine. He has a comic book shop in Charleston, South Carolina. They brought in Lou Ferrigno for signings at the showing, and then today for Free Comic Book Day.
Nice.
So, you know, you have stuff like that people are willing to go out there and pass the word.
Oh, yeah.
Not that it really needs to be passed, but, you know, it's good to see strong support for that.
It really is, and I mean, the thing is, too, that, look at John Carter. John Carter's another, you know...
yeah. Which I actually always liked the character, but, you know, and I was hoping that, you know, to see them do something great with that.
I liked the film. I thought that there were some flaws, and part of the problem is that the marketing and the marketing failures really played up the flaws more than the strengths.
Do you also feel, because my feeling about it was that, you know, the character as written back then really doesn't translate to today's reality and the PC world that we live in.
That's very difficult too. I mean, it's the same problem they had with Jonah Hex in a lot of ways. Like, there's baggage inherently that comes with having your character be a Confederate.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether he's like the Confederate with a conscience. And in the case of John Carter, it's probably more pronounced because it was actually written at a time when those people were walking around and you didn't have to make a caricature of them.
Yeah.
Jonah Hex suffered from that problem as a film. But it suffered from that problem.
Megan Fox.
Yeah. But it also, like, that character was created in, I think, the mid-'60s. It was created late enough that...
It's like late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah. But built into his mythology is, like, a way around the baggage of the Confederacy and the fact that he was kind of a hesitant soldier.
He was a hesitant soldier, and then now he's I'll do anything for the money kind of deal.
Yeah, but I think it's very telling that characters who are created later, they need that. And that John Carter, because they were so slavish to the source material, they avoided that. And so I think that John Carter had a lot of the same problems that Watchmen had.
Yes.
Where when you get a filmmaker who's too in love with the source material, it can go way afield. Which is funny because one of the things, once again going back to the Hiddleston interview that I did, one of the things Hiddleston said about the Avengers was that, or no, this was actually Clark Gregg said about the Avengers, was that getting Whedon was a real coup for them because not only is he a guy who loves the comics and who's really reverential of the material, but more than that, he loves them enough to let them be a movie.
Yep.
That he didn't feel the need to do every single thing exactly the way it was done before. And I really think that when you see movies that are done like that, the only one I can think of that's ever worked is Sin City.
Yes.
Every other time people have tried to go beat for beat, it's always been a failure. And I think it's very telling that Sin City was written very recently at a time when everything was starting to be optioned. Yeah. And it couldn't be too far from the back of Miller's mind that this might someday be a movie.
And then you go from that to the complete polar opposite, which was the Spirit.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the Spirit character growing up. My dad used to have the comics every now and then, but there comes a point where you have to say, change is good.
Yeah, well, especially because the stories that Will Eisner wrote, and I mean, one of the things that's interesting about it is Miller got this movie that other people wanted because he was friends with Eisner, right?
Yep.
Meanwhile, Will Eisner and Frank Miller are famous for having argued at some length about the way to approach superhero and this kind of storytelling. They didn't see eye to eye. And so the idea of Frank Miller trying to do a Will Eisner character without major modifications and without trying to update, it's kind of like, obviously it doesn't work, because it's like trying to mix an acid and a base and come out with something that tastes good. Like, it might happen one time out of a million, but the chances are really, really slim.
Exactly. And really, honestly, it's always been kind of hit or miss with the industry that way. And like you say, I mean, if you're willing to make the changes you need to make for source material, earlier today on the show we were talking about AMC and The Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah.
That's a perfect example. I mean, they're willing to take the key points that you need, because you're not going to do a series like that without saying, okay, we need to do this, we need to do the prison, we need to do that. But, be willing to actually make changes to the source material and be the creator who makes those changes.
Right.
Kirkman with the whole concept of the character of Daryl, who, obviously is heads and shoulders above, as far as in terms of popularity of the characters on the show. And somebody who's never even in the original books.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because that show has been really reactive, and the comics have been reacting to it. And so even though they're telling wildly different versions of the story, and they're at different points in the setting, you can see that some of the kind of intellectual blowback from working on the show is starting to filter into the comic for Kirkman. There was that point in time where Rick had taken the prisoner both in the TV show and in the comics, and they were having the same conversations, and you're sitting here going, that works fine, because it's not redundant, because in the TV show that was an invented storyline.
Exactly.
Whereas if they've done it before in the comics, and then they just resurrected it to be in time with a television show, everybody would be like, well, that's horseshit.
Yeah, it's like, okay, think of something new for this one.
Yeah.
I absolutely understand. Well, Russ, I gotta tell you, it's been a great time talking to you. We appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have some links for your podcast and your blog up on our
Cool. Well, I'll steal one of your
one of my little business cards.
So we can. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for being on the show. Appreciate it.